Well, Jesus's influence is certainly par none because he is the most influential person in the history of the world, no doubt about it. Um, Years ago, there's a book I read. Years ago, I read a book by, well, hold on one second. It is not what I'm looking for. There it is. Okay, let's do that. Okay, there we go. Yeah. Years ago, I read a book by D. James Kennedy. If you know D. James Kennedy, he was a famous pastor down in Florida of a giant church down there, and he helped start Evangelism Explosion. You know, big intellectual guy, had a bunch of degrees, but he passed away. But he co-wrote a book with Jerry Newcomb called "What If Jesus Never Been Born?" I think I had that book when I first came out, and so, I thought that was pretty interesting. And then more recently, my friend James Warner Wallace came out with the book Person of Interest, which we did a Zoom call with him 2 years ago, I think, when it came out, and we interviewed him on that book. Some of you were there, and that's another book about the influence of Jesus on human history. And then there's another book called How Christianity Changed the World by Alvin Schmidt. That's a little older book. Um, there's a lot of books that have been written about this topic, no doubt about it. So, but if you want to just kind of go deeper, you can get those three books. I think probably the D. James Kennedy book was probably the most simple book of all three of them. So anyway, so just check it out if you want to go deeper. But they're all good resources. Um, so people have complained throughout history that Christianity is a crutch. Of course, they've complained that it has impeded scientific progress, that it's held back scientific progress. It's been used as a way to promote bigotry in our society. Some people blame it on sources of hatred, racism, even division, um, whatever. You could go on and on. I mean, all the complaints that about it. And of course, there's been complaints, it causes wars and causes pollution, animal extinction, or contributes to population explosion with their views on the anti-abortion views of Christianity. So, these are all cultural things that people bring up. And so they look at maybe sometimes the history of Christianity is a negative thing, right? Certainly been a source of negative things that have happened in the world. Now, it is true that you could go through Christian history, and I mean, I'm talking about after Jesus came. If you go throughout history, second, third, fourth, fifth century, sixth, you keep going on and on. There's some things that some certainly some black spots on Christian history. We have the anti-Semitism, we have the Crusades. I mean, the Crusades is a whole topic in itself. We could go over that. That's kind of misunderstood by some people. There's supposedly the Salem witch trials. Um, there's other things on the Christian black spots in Christian history. The priest scandals, and Catholicism. Of course, pastors have had scandals too. I mean, none of these things falsify who Jesus is, but certainly his followers haven't always gotten it right. But in many cases, they have gotten it right. And so that's what we want to, talk a little bit tonight about some of the impact of, the Jesus on the world around us. Now, um, there's been no doubt there have been big thinkers, big intellectuals that have, you know, said things about Christianity throughout history. Karl Marx said that Christianity and religion is an opiate of the masses. It's a tool of exploitation. Um, the Sigmund Freud, he said Christianity is an illusion, right? He talked about, Christians needing comfort. It's a source of comfort, and needing a father figure, a source of guilt and pathologies. You know, Russell said something really, quite explicitly. He said, I say quite deliberately that the Christian religion is organized in churches has been and still is a principal enemy of moral progress in the world. One time, Gloria Steinman said that human potential must replace God by the year 2000. Well, it didn't happen. She was wrong. because can't get rid of God because God is real. So, there's been all kinds of critics for sure. And we know that in some cases today, Christianity is viewed as being wedded with certain cultural issues or being wedded with politics. A lot of the complaints today is that Christianity is too political, or it's linked to a political view of reality. Um, whatever. I mean, that's a whole other topic for another time. But there's obviously still complaints to this day. But in the end, it doesn't, of course, falsify who Jesus is. No doubt about it. Um, so we let's talk a little bit first about science. Well, wait a minute. I'm sorry. The impact of science, or I'm sorry, the impact of Christianity on science. So, it's been viewed sometimes that Christianity has been a science stopper. That it stops the scientific progress. If maybe the Christian church has somewhat persecuted scientists or tried to silence scientists, or their view on miracles, Christianity's view on miracles kind of goes outside the scientific realm, and it hurts scientific progress. But, that's just not true. Science, if you look at the history of science, when modern science arose out of medieval Europe around that period, as far as the formation of medieval science, it certainly was influenced more by the Christian worldview than anything else. It wasn't polytheism or a polytheistic religion that produced science. The polytheism is the view of that there's many gods, right? That's like Hinduism. Because part of the issue is that there's no way to view finite, these are finite gods, versus an infinite God. And you'd have to say the finite gods created the universe. But the scientists in the medieval period didn't view the universe as being created by finite gods. In a polytheistic worldview, it's not even the result of a rational mind. So it's more of the result of multiple gods, or and who knows who knows if those gods are rational. So a lot of the scientists in the medieval period did not really adhere to any kind of polytheistic view of reality. And then you had, what's called pantheism. And pantheism is kind of like what you see in Hinduism and Buddhism, where kind of is like the force be with you in Star Wars kind of view that, the universe doesn't have any personal feature to it. It's just an impersonal force guiding everything. Okay. No mind, no real personal agent. And so that, that didn't really foster the scientific endeavor, because, to say there's an impersonal mind, guiding the universe, we have personal human beings as scientists, human beings that have personality. They're not impersonal. They make choices. They're not just an impersonal force. So, it's kind of hard to do science when you have a view that the whole world's impersonal. So that didn't really help modern science at all, and didn't produce modern science. So what happened was a lot of the modern or the scientists in the medieval period all believed that there was a personal God behind the universe, and he created the laws of nature. Remember, there's no science apart from the laws of nature. I mean, if there's no nature and no laws of nature, you can't do science, because science is a study of nature, and it's a study of the natural laws, how the natural laws and the laws of nature work within our world. Studies the mechanisms of nature. So a lot of these famous scientists all believed in some kind of a personal God. Now, not all of them were Christians, but they believed in at least some kind of personal God. They weren't necessarily, they weren't atheists or anything, and they may have been deistic. At least they thought God created the world. But they certainly weren't pantheists, and they weren't polytheistic. You can see some of these famous names here. But these are the guys that certainly had a huge impact on the scientific realm. And one of the reasons they believe that a personal God, or even the Christian or the biblical God, was the God behind the scientific realm, is because the physical universe certainly is observable. It's a distinct objective reality. It's orderly, it's rational, it has patterns. The universe is not chaotic. They can do their scientific experiments. They don't have to worry about a chaotic universe. um, there's the principle of uniformity there. The laws of nature are uniform throughout the physical universe, which allows them to guarantee predictability and scientific outcomes. So, the reasoning was this must have come from a rational mind, a rational God, some sort of being that is rational. And, they just obviously to say that, the opposite would be to say that the world came about through a naturalistic process, and that you'd have to say that the universe is the product, of a blind, purposeless, random natural process, right? And so that's really hard to justify, because you'd have to say a random and chaotic universe can account for an orderly universe and a uniform of nature. And so it just, for them, to say a mindless process accounts for the universe we have, not to mention the laws of logic and numbers and everything, just didn't make sense to a lot of those scientists. So that's why they really believed in some sort of personal God, or the Christian view of the beginning of the universe. It was caused by God. So, there's a guy named John Polkinghorne, and he was a famous physicist out of England. He's also a priest too. I think he was maybe an Episcopalian priest. I don't remember, but he died, I think, a few years back. But he wrote a lot of books on God and science. And the one thing that he wanted to argue for God's existence was that the universe is intelligible, meaning that we take it for granted that we can even understand it. It's what makes science possible. We have to be able to understand the universe. It has to be intelligible to us. It's orderly, and we can just even understand it. He says we just take it for granted. He says, why is that? Why is the universe so intelligible? And so that was one of his arguments for at least believing in some kind of, he was a Christian, but one of his arguments for why, science and God are compatible with each other. They're not, at odds with each other. And even Paul Davies, he teaches physics, I think, at the University of Arizona. Not really Christian. He's some sort of deist, I think, but he admits the fact that science got its starting place in the theological worldview. He says even the most atheistic scientist accepts the fact that the universe is not absurd, that there is a rational basis to physical existence, manifested as a law-like order in nature that is at least in part comprehensible to us. So science can proceed only if the science adopts a theological worldview. So, that's coming from a guy that isn't really even a committed follower of Jesus. He just admits that, listen, science, it's, the universe itself and the way science is set up by the universe allows us to do our science orderly. So he kind of says what Polkinghorne says as well. Now, there's four things that also the science can explain, and that the scientists know that it can't explain. But I mean, at least if you understand the way science works, in order for science to get off the ground, you definitely need a universe, and we can't explain the origin of the universe. Science can't explain the origin of the laws of nature. Those things all came into the beginning of the universe. Science starts at the beginning of the universe. That's when we have science starting, when the universe comes to existence and the laws of nature come into existence. Science still hasn't been able to explain the origin of life. They haven't figured that out, at least using the scientific method. I mean, I know we certainly believe as Christians that God created first life, but I'm talking about in the scientific realm, where all they do is use a scientific method. They haven't figured that out. And they certainly haven't figured out the origin of mind and thought. So we believe those things are all grounded in God, but, I'm just saying using the scientific process. So, all the things, these four things that science can't explain, one of the problems is they all transcend the physical world or the material world, and science can only study the material physical world. So, there has to be a transcendent source behind those things. Okay. Now, is another guy wrote a book a ways back. Rodney Stark. He was a famous sociologist. I think he was Catholic. He wrote a ton of books, Rodney Stark. Just look him up on Amazon. But I think in one of his books, he said that not only, no, he does say this. I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I have it on my shelf. Something how Christianity influenced reason and science, something like that. But he said not only were science and religion compatible, they were inseparable. The rise of science achieved by deeply religious Christian scholars. So he was a pretty famous sociologist. You can look up some of his books online. Now, there were three medieval developments that led to the emergence of the natural sciences, or the natural sciences. You had the translation of important Greek and Arabic science-related texts into Latin. Of course, you had the establishment of great universities of Western Europe. And then you had one of the things, certainly you had university-trained Christian theologians and philosophers who, certainly impacted the scientific realm, which is created by God. So, theology was really once viewed, as the queen of all sciences, really, when theology was respected that way. But it's kind of changed a bit. So now, if you want to go deeper on this, I also recommend the book by John Lennox, the British mathematician and science guy. He has a book called God's Undertaker, Science Buried God. It came out about a ways back, maybe 2007. I think he updated it there. But anyway, that's another good book. Okay, so also as far as Jesus, his influence on the world, definitely an impact on higher education, because if you study the Puritans, they were about 95% literate. Many of the universities, 100 of the first 110 universities in America are founded on Christian principles. If you go to Harvard, what's their charter? Whatever happened to Harvard now, as we know that there's been major problems over the last 6 months there with all the protests, or 3 months or 4 months. But if you look at the charter at Harvard, it has that statement: "Let every student be plainly instructed and earnestly pressed to consider well the main end of his life and studies to know God and Jesus Christ, which is eternal life." It's a pretty powerful statement for a school such as Harvard. I think many of them have forgotten that, of course. Many other universities emerged from American seminaries, Princeton, of course, Yale. So there's no doubt that, there's a huge influence on education. That is true today, that many of the universities today are secular, unless you go to a Christian school, of course, but they didn't start out that way. Obviously, the Christian influence was there, but through history, especially when you had the church, you had the influence of what we call higher criticism on the academic studies, and people brought non-biblical ideas into the university, influenced by somewhat we call German higher criticism. A lot of the Christians in the universities didn't know how to respond, and what happened is they withdrew from the university. So then you had a lot of Christians withdrawing from universities and starting their own Bible colleges and seminaries. And so, unfortunately, the salt and light of Christians in the education system in the secular universities was kind of was impacted. Unfortunately, we didn't have the impact we used to have, and we kind of been playing catch up ever since, trying to be salt and light in an academic secular university. We've been trying to do that for decades now, and there's certainly Christians in the university system, but it's not near what it was when they first started, because I said a lot of them were started by Christians and started as Christian schools, really. Okay, and also Jesus has had a huge impact on the printing press. The printing press was accelerated at the same time as the Protestant Reformation. We know many of the world's languages were, first set to writing by Christian missionaries, had to translate them in order for people to read the Bible. And there's no doubt that the influence, sorry, I'm looking for something here. I'll go back to this. There's no doubt that the Bible just the influence of the Bible on the world is never going to be matched. It's the most famous book of all time. I mean, the most best-selling book of all time, 5 billion copies sold and more, obviously. And the Bible's influence on humanity is unmatched. But City of God, by the way, by Augustine, that has sold more copies than any other book than the Bible. It's one of the most important books ever written. I also want to mention that the influence on, literature as far as Christian faith, influencing people, such as C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, writing those fantasy novels that have just sold in the millions, others too, Charles Dickens, Milton, Dante, Shakespeare, others. So Christian influence on literature has been obviously quite amazing. I think C.S. Lewis books still sell in the millions. I think he's one of the most best-selling Christian writers of all time. If you've ever read any of his books, if you haven't, you should. So, and by the way, any impact, I didn't have something on these slides, but Christianity's influence on Hollywood, on movies. If you look at any movie about a superhero, or just about any movie, has been a lot of movies, almost all movies, it's like just about maybe 70% of all movies have been influenced by somewhat of a Christian or biblical view, because you always have in these movies, you have an evil in the world, you have a villain, you have evil, and then you have a savior figure that has to come along and stop it, and then he has to sacrifice himself. And that's what actually, if you look at all the Marvel movies, all the Batman movies, Superman movies, it's always about a savior figure who's going to lay down his life for the world to save the world, right? And that is, it happens in the Lord of the Rings with Frodo. He has to sacrifice himself to destroy the ring because there's evil in the world. So it happens in the Marvel Avengers movies, Tony Stark laying down his life to save the world. I don't think you've seen those movies, but the list goes on. No doubt Christianity it's just all over Hollywood, no doubt about it. Now, also Christianity, or Jesus, the influence of Jesus is in the Protestant work ethic. It's certainly, that work ethic spread throughout Europe and America. I don't think that, maybe people are aware of it, how much, the work ethic that we have today was influenced by the Protestant work ethic, even though people don't say that. But if you study history, it did influence our current work ethic. You have certainly music impacted heavily by Christianity. If you just read some of the famous composers, they were all Christians who worked to honor God with their work. Bach would sign his works was solely to the glory of God. And if you listen to classical music, my dad listened to classical music a lot growing up. Sometimes I would find him in his chair, just sitting there listening to it, his hands folded like this, and he would just be listening to it heavily by himself, meditating on it. Tears would be going down his cheeks sometimes. I think that because some of that music is kind of transcendent. I mean, there's something transcendent about it. It's glorious, and you can see God's handprints on it. That just it's something that he influenced these writers or influenced these composers. With the work they did. Now, music today, of course, not everything. There's a lot of Christian music out today that still is influenced by Jesus. Of course, there's ones that do it better than others. But his influence on the music industry is here to stay. So anyway, and then of course there's no doubt that that the impact of charity in the world. There's Christianity has had more influence on the philanthropy than anything else. If you look at all the organizations and you go and add up all the charity organizations that are out there and their worldwide influence, there's even more that are on this page right here, but there's just the impact, of all these organizations influenced by Jesus and their impact on the world. by far outdo anything else. I know there's secular groups out there that do charity and stuff, and they boast about they can do it too. But I think if you study world history, that the statistics show that um, actually it is. I should have the quote. Religious people give more to charity than any other people group. And then secondly, that there's more, these organizations have more of an impact than any other organizations. So the impact on charity is ongoing. There's more, like I said, there's way more organizations than mentioned here. As far as slavery, no doubt that there have been professing Christians throughout history that didn't get it right on slavery. We know that. Some of them, whether they're real Christians, I don't know, but sometimes they misuse the Bible, of course. We know that. I mean, it's just part of our American history, I should say, and possibly other places in the world. But there's no doubt that many of the American abolitionists were all Christian ministers, especially Wilberforce in England. When he went to Parliament, the Parliament in England, and he was, he had a major influence on getting slavery abolished in England. Wilberforce was converted to Christianity, William Wilberforce. We know that many of the other abolitionists were Christians. So for all the bad things that Christianity had, as far as an influence on that, we know that many of the abolitionists were definitely professing Christians. And, obviously, slavery is still happening in the world today. Human trafficking is everywhere. We've got major problems of human trafficking. People are being sold, children are being sold. And Christian charity and Christian groups are trying to stop that, no doubt about that. They should be on the forefront of doing that, which I think they are. So anyway. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry. John Wesley, the guy who founded Methodism, he had a big he was someone who preached a lot of the social responsibilities of Christian piety. We know in 1833, slavery was abolished in British Empire, 45 million pounds paid in compensation to free 780,933 slaves. And as I said, Wilberforce, along with others, were all converted to Christianity under Wesley's ministry, under John Wesley's ministry. And they were the top British people who helped end slavery there. So anyway, and also the impact on women, Christianity's impact on women. I know that when I was a new Christian, my mom came up to me, and God bless her heart, but she just wasn't really biblically educated on some things. And she said to me that the Bible's been used to harm women. And I'm sure it has somewhere. I mean, I know that men could take the passage, wives submit to women out of context in Ephesians 5 and abuse women. I'm sure that's happened because, as I said, Christians haven't always gotten things right, and some of them are not educated about it. But we know in Jesus's time that in the Greco-Roman world he was in, that they would throw out female infants to die from exposure because of low status of women in society. And then they also saw no value in unmarried women. Therefore they thought it was illegal for a widow to go 2 years without remarrying. Christianity, of course, came along and said you can't do that. You can't throw female infants to die from exposure. And certainly Christianity did not force widows to remarry. They were supported financially by their community. And we know that Jesus alone in his ministry, I'm sorry, and I'll go to Jesus in a second, but we know that infanticide was legal and applauded in the ancient classical Roman and Greek world. Killing a child could be an act of beauty, but obviously Christianity came along and put an end to infanticide. And we know today the pro-life movement is largely Christian, and it's been pro-life from the beginning. But Jesus came along. I guess I don't have the slide here. I'm sorry. There's a slide I had. It's on here. But Jesus comes along, by the way, and in his ministry, he has women, in a Jewish culture that is, um, women are not totally disregarded, but they're certainly not as held as highly as men. And their testimony isn't as regarded as highly as men. Um, Not as quite as bad as the Roman society, but certainly not as it just Jesus comes along and he kind of turns things, takes in a different direction. He talks to the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, that's forbidden. Then he has women in his ministry, Mary and Martha, and then the book of the Bible records the women witnesses at his crucifixion scene, and who the first witnesses to the resurrection? Women, women, women. Okay, and you would think that in a Jewish culture, if you want to convince somebody's risen from the dead, you wouldn't put women witnesses as the first witnesses. It just wouldn't make a lot of sense. So, our faith, Jesus and the gospel authors certainly took it in a different direction. And of course, Paul, wrote things about Ephesians 5 is the way men should treat women. Whatever you believe, you're complementarian or complementarianism or egalitarianism, whatever your view is on men and women. Overall, the Christianity took that in a different direction to help women, right? But as I said, with children, the influence on children, though, was certainly this was the way it was in the Greco-Roman world, and of course, Christianity ended infanticide. As far as they said, no more of that because of the influence of Jesus. Christianity also gave us the hospitals we know today. We know in the days of Jesus that hospitals and physical treatment were reserved strictly for generally slaves or Roman gladiators, soldiers, and the rich. But we know at the beginning, it was decreed after probably around the 4th century that for every church built, a corresponding hospital had to be built next to it. And that's why I think if you go in around any city in the United States, including my city, you see a lot of hospitals that are, they're either Baptist, Catholic, Methodist, Presbyterian, whatever. There's a big Methodist hospital where I live. It's just that's the influence of Jesus, on hospitals, of course. We know the missionaries have gone into countries and built hospitals. We know that Christian doctors have gone into certain parts of the world to help others, to help the needy and the poor. So also with adoption and foster care, it's been common, in some cases for children to be thrown away or drowned or sold. Christians were the first ones to get babies from the dumpsters and adopt them, to open up adoption centers for children, right? So obviously the influence of Jesus on children, obviously you see the way Jesus treats children in the Gospels, that influence is carried on to today. I know the foster care system today is by no means perfect. There's problems with it. There's brokenness. There's people that, want to complain about it. I had a pro-abortion student maybe 3 weeks ago. She just was going on and on. She was in foster care and she was giving justification why we should allow abortion because people shouldn't be born into the foster care system, and because of her personal experience. And of course, we had a long conversation. But the point is that, even though if the foster care needs help and needs to be transformed in certain ways, we know that Christians certainly, hopefully, I think they are on the forefront of adoption. Plenty of adoption going on, and churches, should be promoting adoption as well. Oh, I'm sorry. There was the slide about Jesus and the women. So, yeah, as I was saying, men could mistreat and abuse their wives with no legal recourse, and women were not allowed to testify in court. But it was Jesus who befriended women as his own, included them in his ministry. He had Mary, the mother of James, Mary Magdalene, and we know, as I said, the first witnesses, the resurrection, are when women feature the crucifixion scene. So it's kind of significant. Of course, I've talked a little bit about this before, but being that Christianity views all humans are created in the image and likeness of God, that changes the whole ball game, because if you want to give some kind of basis or some kind of grounding point for why humans have value or why they matter, you need something to ground that. And with our worldview, we say that all humans have the right to life and resources to sustain it because all humans are created in the image and likeness of God. So we have a right to human dignity, a right to value, a right to rights, just to have rights. No matter what our background is, our age, our gender, race, rank, or anything, we have all the same dignity, value, and rights based on being made in the image of God. And of course, that has formed the basis for all human rights across all cultures. Um, Rights are linked to personhood. And if we're made in the image and likeness of God, we are intrinsically valuable. We're not valuable based on our function, what we can do. Sometimes based on what we can contribute to society. It's not based on what we look like or what skills we have. It's based on being endowed. It's an endowment thing. God is endowed it with inherent dignity based on being created in his image. So sadly, many people don't believe that. We know that the Declaration of Independence says we hold to these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, obviously. Now, the other thing that maybe people take for granted is the issue of freedom. Um, I think that it's obvious to me that the lack of history teaching in our country and the lack of because people, young people, I should say, or just maybe college age, I don't know, but just in general, kind of some people in the younger crowd or younger generation, I don't want to stereotype, but some of them are really interested in the present. It's called presentism. It's not the past is the past. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. We live in the present. All that matters is the present. What's going on in the present. That's sad because they really sometimes don't know where their freedoms come from. Okay. And they don't know how free they are. And they don't know, they take them for granted. They don't know who laid down their lives to
Can't
give
hear
them
you,
their
Eric.
freedom. Can you hear me?
Hear you now.
What? Can you hear me?
I hear you now.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you, Larry. Just text me if that happens again. I got my phone right here. Um, but it's obviously that Declaration of Independence is certainly influenced by Christianity, obviously. In that, our country itself is, supposed to be example liberty and justice, because we're not, socialist country yet, or a communist country yet, or a fascist country yet, even though people are crying out that we're going to be one of these three things over the next 10 to 20 years. Um, but the point is that we're based on a view of liberty and justice. The American Constitution was signed by 39 men. I don't know if all of them were Christians. There's a debate about that. Some probably were, maybe not every one of them. Maybe some were deistic. I don't know. But they're certainly influenced by something Christian. And we know that God values freedom, or, Jesus valued freedom of the individual. Freedom and rights are something that are part of being made in the image of God. So no doubt Christianity has had a major impact on the arts and architecture. I think you could go any parts of the world, maybe around your own state, around your own country, wherever you live, find plenty of Christian architecture, plenty of art. Many artists, of course, are influenced by Christianity when they, drew their paintings and did what they did. And we know that there's some of the most beautiful Christian architecture there is in the world. I mean, some of the architecture I'm talking about that, whether they be churches or buildings, whatever, I mean, they're amazing. But they certainly, been impacted by Jesus. Jesus, one thing leads to another. I know God doesn't dwell in buildings, as we know, he dwells everywhere. But the point is that people have constructed some amazing architecture because of the influence of Christianity. So, and there's a case that can be made that if you're in the arts as a Christian, that you can make an argument from beauty that why is the world beautiful? Now, I know some people maybe not think it's beautiful, but why can you see a sunset? Why can you see a rainbow? And why can you look at the ocean? And there's just all kinds of things that are beautiful. The aesthetics in the world. And so there's an argument that Christians could be redeeming art. Making it, if you're in the arts, to make it beautiful. It's supposed to glorify God, right? It's supposed to point people to God. So, let me say that Jesus is, let me mention this. Whatever your calling is in life, I don't know, some of you have already had careers on this call. Some of you are in the middle of careers. Some of you are looking for a career. Some of you may be switching careers. Some of you have thought long and hard about what to do with your vocation. Some of us are in the arts. Some of us are in law enforcement. Some of us in business. Some of us are in social work. Some of us are in counseling or police work or janitors. I don't know, whatever you're in. The list goes on. We are the salt and light into the world. So wherever we are, we're supposed to have an influence, right? And so we're supposed to show how Jesus has impacted us, and then in turn we impact others. We impact our vocation. And that's why many vocations that are out there, like the business world or the world of the police force or firefighters or the arts or whatever it is, we're supposed to redeem it, and we're supposed to point people to God. And so hopefully the impact of Jesus in the world around us is, goes on through us. And, when people see us and they see the way we work and do our job and how we impact others, they see Jesus in us. And so, Jesus's impact continues obviously on with us. He's already impacted all these areas of the world, but he's still doing it through us, right? He impacts the world of sports through people in the sports world who are open about their faith in Jesus. They impact their teams. They impact the sports industry. He impacts people in all kinds of things, vocations and places in the world. So hopefully you're thinking about that and having the bigger picture, of how much education's a huge one, obviously. If you're in the education system, and there's a lot of bad things being taught in the education system, whether it be high school, elementary school, or universities, you represent Jesus there, and hopefully you can be salt and light there and have an impact there, right? So there's all kinds of places that we can go and all kinds of opportunities we have, but hopefully the impact of Jesus is carrying on through us today, because it is ongoing until he comes back. So those are just some of the ways. Like I said, if Jesus had never been born, the world would look very, very, very different, radically different. And there's no doubt about it that the impact of Christianity is around us every day. Just think of the command, love thy neighbors thyself. I mean, how much that has impacted world history. So anyway, so that's just some of the things Jesus has impacted the world with. There's greater detail in some of these books, but so I'm going to stop there. I started a little shorter tonight, as I said, and we can maybe chat. So that's about it, really.